Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Louise.
I feel like we've skipped pleasantries the last few times. We just dug right in.
I know.
We are, as Sarah just mentioned, back into American Baby here, chapter 15, going west, getting very close to the end of this amazing novel. It's amazing. We had
Not in a
yeah,
novel though.
not a novel, right?
If it were a novel, would
Exactly.
people would be like, this isn't this doesn't this
Real.
can't be true.
hmm
Yeah.
So, one thing, I was talking with a group up here. I was telling you before we hopped on, in our area about different causes that they're working on in our area. And so we were thinking on our podcast, we would have people write in and tell us in your area, if you're an adoptee and would like to put a resource going on that you're working on, that we could highlight it on the podcast.
Yeah, like if you have an adoptee
Mm-hmm.
group and you're trying to find people and you want
Mm-hmm.
us to shout you out on the podcast so you can get people to reach out to
Mm-hmm.
you, absolutely. And we will do that, you know, every a couple times a month or
Yeah.
something. We'll send out the resources.
Yeah, it'd be great. We'll start with the one that they were talking about this weekend. I'll get the information for next week, but think about that. That's a good thing for us to help in the
Yeah,
community.
give back in the community.
Yeah.
And speaking of giving back, thank you to our Patreons. We just keep getting people signing up and it's really, really great. And we feel so supported and it really helps us to be able to keep going
Mm-hmm.
and reach even more adoptees, which is our goal.
Yeah. Right
So
before we got on today, somebody sent a
somebody became a
Patreon.
Patreon.
They did.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
We
really
always list our Patreons unless they ask to be
anon.
anonymous in our show notes. So you can hop on there and see that too. So
Yep. Well, here we are. We're going.
oh boy. Yeah, I liked knowing what was going on in David's life and he sounds so charismatic, right? Just like
Oh
this
my goodness.
and
Yeah. I
getting
really, yeah, I felt the same way as you. I just was like, this is an interesting man. I'm glad she devoted some time to that because she got to know him obviously in
mhm.
real time. And he's just this bigger than life. His singing was so important. He ended up going to Oregon to become a cantor. And was he a rabbi actually in Oregon?
Right, because in no, he was a cantor.
Mm-hmm.
And he had two job offers. One was Long
Yeah.
Island and one was Portland. And so his friend, or not sure who it was like, you'll be a small fish in a big pond in New York, but if you go to Portland, you'll be a big fish. So he went and it was just like absolute culture shock, you know.
Yeah. It's Portland from the East Coast from Israel and from
Yes,
Toronto. It was a big culture shock. And he ended up falling in love,
getting married.
getting married, and really just having family and loving having two boys, which is where obviously adoptees go through a ton of things when they have their
Oh,
own
and but
children.
before that,
hmm
Esther, his
Oh,
adoptive
right.
mother, died.
Forgot. hmm
He went over to Israel with his wife and to introduce or pre-marriage. So
Yeah. He
he
had
went
a,
through that loss. But that is when he started thinking about, can
yeah.
he search for his biological mother? And he reached out and they were like, if she signed up for the, and of course Margaret had never heard of this registry to sign up
No.
for. I'm
And
sure
he
the
felt like
lead.
it was a little daunting himself, didn't he? He was, and
Well, there was just a lot of hoops. You have to get the
yeah.
approval of your adoptive parents, who, by the way, had already died. He was
Yeah.
like, which is when you think about that, it's absurd. The adult adoptees have to go ask their
Permission.
permission to
Yeah.
access their own records. I
Yeah.
mean, we talk about this all the time. We know about this. It's just still so
Well, it's like we're just infants forever, children
we're
forever.
infantilized.
hmm
Exactly. Infantilized is
Yeah. Well, then they do get pregnant. He and his wife, they have two boys, which again
and then the
starts,
daughter. Yeah.
and a daughter, which again starts the whole wondering for him.
Hmm.
And, it gets into a little bit at the same time. He's having kids and going through this. Margaret's going through her own thing at like she goes back and forth with them, which I like. And I don't know, I just felt like when he had his son on his birthday, he had his second boy Noah or something on his birthday. There
Hmm.
was something in there that made me sad because he's like, oh, finally it's important, like this day. And he thought, how did I come into this world? What is my story?
Mm-hmm.
It's heartbreaking because we know the story and he
He
didn't.
and then he started having terrible health
Ah,
problems,
right?
following in George's footsteps, and
Yeah.
then lost his ability to sing.
Yeah. I mean, he was
Um,
young when he's late 30s and going into he even lost weight. He went to a place to lose weight, a camp.
right.
Is that camp they
What
called
they
it?
used to call it is we'll get canceled if we say that in
Yeah.
here. So
And
not say.
he went there and he lost a ton of weight. Didn't matter. His
Mm-hmm.
He started to have kidney failure and a lot of other problems that come with diabetes, pre-diabetes, at his young age, even though he was very active and playing hockey, got both his boys into hockey. I mean, that was continuing on also from
Mm-hmm.
George, right? And it was sad because Margaret had tried to warn the Louise Wise agency of all these things. Didn't he have cancer, thyroid?
Mm-hmm. Thyroid cancer. They removed half his thyroid.
Yeah. Very young. I was thinking, it's not like we're talking about an old man here. Wasn't he late 30s? I mean, it was,
Yeah, yeah. And then this is like going on what ended up going on socially in the world
yeah.
with adoption was that changed, and they started to realize that keeping health records from adoptees was not right, and shifts in social norms.
Mm-hmm.
It started reducing the number of unplanned pregnancies. Some of the numbers were really startling to me,
Shocking.
right? The number of babies surrendered for adoption in the United States dropped 26% in 5 years, from an estimated 175,000 nationally in 1970 to 129,000 in 1975. That year, mysteriously, the federal government stopped counting the number of adoptions and never did so again.
Yeah. What was that about?
But the number of parents looking to adopt was still high, even though the baby boom was over.
Yep.
So the
And
Louise
Roe v.
Wise,
White. Mm-hmm.
yeah, Robbie White had come about. Louise Wise agency redoubled its efforts to start placing children of color with its white clientele. The agency, along with many others, arranged adoptions of older children, Black children, as well as Native Americans, many of whom had been forcibly removed from their families and
Yep.
their tribal lands. Not surprisingly, African American and Native communities vehemently objected to this approach, saying it deprived the children of their
Oh,
cultural heritage.
yep. Which it does. I mean, and we just talked about that with Chris Stearns. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
these kids being taken from their homes and, you know, created differently for our country. And then the overseas stuff starts
Which I
because,
wrote in my notes, predatory.
yeah, as soon as there was a war, anything happened. I mean, the numbers are huge everywhere. I was surprised by Americans adopted more than 85,000 Chinese children
I know.
in 10 years. That was only in wasn't it in a 10-year period?
And then
Overwhelmingly girls, obviously, because of China policies. Mm-hmm.
and before that, this Baptist couple started the,
Oh, right.
the Holt International, to get, they were bringing kids over from Korea. And then, of course, Operation Baby Lift out of
Yes.
Vietnam. But between 1955 and the early 2000s, Holt and other agencies in Korea facilitated the adoptions of an estimated 150,000 children by American families.
Mm-hmm. It's eye opening. We had a guest on, John, from Operation
Mm-hmm.
Baby Lift.
Yep.
And I wonder if this agency was part of that actually, involved in his adoption, because they sound pretty involved. Also it got into the Romanian thing after the
Mm-hmm.
war and all these babies and
It was
cribs.
just, it's so predatory.
Yeah, it
That's the
is.
only word that really jumped into my
And
mind
by the
was.
way, it's happening now with,
Mhm. Well, I mean, other countries have got,
yeah.
many countries have gotten,
Yeah, but I mean, even just with the
stopped
war in
closing the,
Ukraine, they start to, as
right.
soon as there's a war, let's figure out how to get kids.
Let's
I
get
mean,
those kids. And then, by the 1990s,
mhm.
Louise Weiss was faltering. They had all the scandals with the twin
Started to
and
come up.
triplet experiments,
Yep.
and they had a couple sue them
Yeah, talk about that one. That was big.
So that they were told that the birth mother was a lovely young woman who was taking care of her mother and was a pianist, and I mean
Yeah,
just
crazy stuff.
absolute fiction.
I picture
Absolute
someone sitting
fiction.
in a room making up stories about, like fiction writing. Oh,
Yeah.
who will they be today? Yeah.
And then it turns out that the mother, the biological mother, was schizophrenic, and the who'd had a
A
lobotomy.
lobotomy. She was 39, by the way.
Yeah, and gave birth at 39. They had been told that she was a young mother,
Hmm.
and that the father she'd met in the psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
So and
He
so
also had his problems.
yes, so
And
they sued and lost.
they
There was
lost, and their
some
son
loophole.
killed himself, right? I
Hmm.
mean, they're not sure if he killed himself, but he died because of his mental illness by the age of 29.
And
That
then
really
another,
exposed them.
yes, then they were sued again by more couples, and
Mhm.
finally they finally shut down.
They shut down. They started to be a agency to help with other things,
Yeah.
which I was like, of course they're remorphing themselves. I'm curious what if they're are even around now in some way, shape, or form.
And
It's
the other really sad part of this chapter was that George died, and George was only
yeah,
56 when he
yeah.
died.
I know because now we're in our 50s. When you read these things, say I was
Hmm.
18 reading this, you're
Yeah,
like,
they
oh,
do.
he was older. Now I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, wow. He
Yeah.
was still young, very
And
young,
all
some
the same diseases
problems.
that
Yeah.
David had David had to have a kidney
Yep. From a
um
friend.
from a
Mhm.
friend. So,
Well,
and Margaret was just
devastated.
devastated and couldn't get out of bed, and goes to a psychiatrist, and oh, and then she found, I thought this
Yes.
was super, this made me cry.
Yeah.
She was going through George's wallet and found pictures of all the kids, and then tucked away were two pictures of Stephen slash
Yeah.
David that
She thought when he died, the connection, that's the one person she had the connection, even though they didn't speak about it anymore. They were together 40 years, her best friend, and the
hmm.
connection to her son. And he still had it too, and they never talked about it. Makes me cry. Why would we talk about
I
it?
know, me too.
It's
Um,
heartbreaking.
and then she goes to a psychiatrist,
Yeah.
and yet another
Zoloft.
she tells the psychiatrist all about the George's
Yeah.
and Stephen, the baby, and the psychiatrist is like, that has nothing to do with it. Take the Zola, take this,
Take the Zoloft and up your dose.
up your
The drugging of women.
Yeah, he's like, there's nothing you can do. Take Zoloft.
No.
So,
And what did she do at the end? It said when she went home and did the only thing she knew to do was think about her children that she
and
had and
pray.
pray.
And she did dump the psychiatrist and stop
Yeah.
taking the Zoloft.
Yeah.
So
She's always tough like that.
we know I love Margaret. We
Me
know
too.
they're headed towards reunion. We
Yeah.
kind of feel that coming.
Yeah.
So I'm
It's
gonna miss
big.
this book.
I am too. I'm really am going to gift it to people. I think it's very important.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Well,
Absolutely.
I'm excited to hear our story coming up. We know a little
Yes,
bit,
we have a good
Janet.
guest, Janet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
so
see you in a minute.
see you soon.